Hello again everyone, and welcome to a special Sunday edition of Rob's Roman Britain, and part 2 in the story of Londinium. Now, when we last left Londinium in the aftermath of the Boudican Revolt, the city lay in ruins. Boudica's forces had burned it to the ground, and for a brief moment it must have seemed as though Rome's great experiment on the Thames had failed as quickly as it had begun. But Londinium did not die. In fact, what followed was one of the most extraordinary recoveries in the history of Roman Britain. Almost immediately after the Boudican Revolt was crushed, the Roman army stepped in to stabilise the situation. On the site of 30 Fenchurch Street, just east of the Walbrook, they constructed a large military fort, covering around 15,000 square metres, with high earth ramparts and deep defensive ditches. This fort was not meant to be permanent. It functioned as an emergency headquarters, protecting the key trade routes, controlling access from the bridge, and overseeing the rebuilding of the shattered city. For around a decade, Londinium was effectively under military management, and the army didn't just defend it, they actively rebuilt it. Roads were repaired, a new quay was constructed along the Thames, and even a water lifting machine was installed, suggesting a highly organised reconstruction effort. By the 70s and 80s AD, the fort was dismantled, and Londinium began to emerge, not as a frontier outpost, but as a fully planned Roman city. The rebuilt Londinium followed a classic Roman street grid, shaped around the bridge and the crossing points of the local rivers. One of the first major civic buildings was the Forum, constructed in the late 1st century AD. It consisted of a large open courtyard, surrounded by shops, with a basilica on the northern side. This basilica was the city's administrative heart, the place where legal cases were heard and the local council met. Unusually for Britain, Londinium's Forum also had a full civic temple, placed just outside the main complex. By around 100 AD, Londinium had overtaken Colchester to become the provincial capital of Britain, with an estimated population of up to 60,000 people, making it one of the largest cities north of the Alps. Near modern Cannon Street, archaeologists have uncovered the foundations of what they believe is the Governor's Palace, a vast complex with gardens, pools, mosaic floors and grand reception halls. This was the seat of Roman power in Britain. Nearby stood public bathhouses and brothels, which were legal but taxed, and a rapidly expanding port. Londinium's true lifeblood was the Thames. On both sides of the river, stretching out from London Bridge, archaeologists have discovered an enormous port complex, rebuilt after Boudica and continuously expanded into the 3rd century. The waterfront was artificially extended with gravel, allowing solid timber wharves to be built. Warehouses lined the river, and the port received goods from across the empire: fine pottery, wine, jewellery, foodstuffs, and luxury items. Interestingly, only a small number of large warehouses have been found, suggesting that Londinium functioned less as a state supply depot and more as a commercial trading hub, a city of merchants, traders, and private enterprise. In the early 2nd century, Londinium reached its absolute height. Stone buildings replaced timber ones, wealthy townhouses with underfloor heating appeared. The Forum was massively expanded into a monumental square over 160 metres wide, with a 3-storey basilica that may have been visible across the entire city. But sometime in the early 120s AD, disaster struck again. Archaeologists have identified widespread layers of burning across large parts of Roman London, an event known as the Hadrianic Fire. Entire districts were destroyed, including warehouses and shops filled with unsold pottery. The fire is not mentioned in any ancient sources, but the archaeological evidence is unmistakable. Whether it was a single catastrophic blaze or a series of smaller fires is still debated. It may have been accidental, or it may reflect political unrest during a turbulent period of imperial history. Either way, Londinium burned again, and once again it was rebuilt. The episode is known as the Hadrianic Fire because the archaeological evidence dates to around the early 120s AD, the same period of time when Hadrian visited Britain in 122 AD. Although no written source records the fire, the coincidence in dating has led historians to link the two events, at least chronologically. After this, Londinium entered a new phase of monumental grandeur. The Forum was reconstructed on an even larger scale. The Temple of Jupiter was renovated, public bathhouses multiplied, the amphitheatre at Guildhall hosted gladiatorial games and public spectacles. The city had piped water, a sophisticated drainage system, and densely packed stone housing. Some private homes, like the waterfront villa at Billingsgate, even had their own bath suites. This was a fully Roman city in every sense, not a colonial outpost, but an urban centre comparable to those in Gaul or on the Rhine. And then it began to shrink. In the late 2nd and early 3rd centuries AD, Londinium's population declined. The reasons are unclear, but plague, economic stagnation, and the end of Roman expansion in Britain all played a role. And yet, during this period of contraction, the city undertook one of its largest building projects in its history, the London Wall. Constructed sometime between 190 and 225 AD, the wall enclosed the entire landward side of the city. It was just over 3 miles long, 6 metres high and nearly 3 metres thick, with a deep defensive ditch in front. The wall would define the shape of the City of London for the next 1600 years. Even today, parts of its course still survive, hidden beneath office blocks and underground stations. And perhaps the most remarkable legacy is that this wall still, more or less, defines what we call the City of London today, which is the small historic core at the centre of modern London, meaning that this tiny area still sits almost exactly on top of the heart of Roman Londinium. Why the wall was built remains debated. It may relate to northern invasions, political instability, or internal revolts. But its message was clear. Londinium was no longer just a commercial city. It was now a fortress. By the 3rd century, Londinium was also one of the most religiously diverse cities in Roman Britain. In Southwark, a temple complex dedicated to Mars stood near the river, and along the Walbrook, archaeologists uncovered one of the most famous Roman religious sites in Britain, the London Mithraeum, built around 240 AD. This underground temple was dedicated to the mysterious cult of Mithras, and it was especially popular amongst soldiers and merchants. Nearby, inscriptions also record a temple of Isis, the Egyptian goddess associated with the sea and navigation, a fitting deity for a port city whose fortunes depended on maritime trade. Londinium was no longer just Roman, it was global. Then came one of the strangest episodes in British history. In 286 AD, the Roman naval commander, Carausius, rebelled against the empire and declared himself emperor in Britain. For nearly a decade, Londinium became the capital of a breakaway Britannic empire, minting its own coins and operating as an independent Roman state. After Carausius was assassinated by Electus, Rome finally launched a full invasion in 296 AD. Electus's mercenaries sacked Londinium, but were cut down when Roman warships finally entered the Thames. The city was liberated, and Rome celebrated by building a new complex of luxurious baths, a symbolic reassertion of imperial authority at the heart of the city. In the 4th century, Londinium was increasingly known as Augusta and became an administrative centre of one of the new provinces created by Diocletian's reforms. Christianity by this point was firmly established. In 314 AD, Bishop Restitutus of Londinium attended the Council of Arles in southern Gaul, making him one of the earliest historically attested Christian leaders of London. And by this point, the city must have had a sizable Christian community, even if we don't know exactly where their main church stood. On Tower Hill, archaeologists have uncovered the remains of a vast 4th century stone building, possibly a cathedral-like structure and perhaps even an early predecessor of St. Paul's. If so, it would suggest that late Roman London was not only an administrative capital, but also a major religious centre. The 4th century, however, was not an age of peace. From around 340 AD onwards, Britain was under increasing pressure from Saxon pirates along the eastern and southern coasts. And these were not just occasional raids, but sustained attacks that forced Rome to rethink the entire defence of the province. And in Londinium, that meant serious military investment. The city walls were strengthened, with at least 22 semicircular towers being added that provided firing platforms for artillery, like ballistae, and the riverside wall was also repaired and reinforced, suggesting very real fears of an attack coming directly up the Thames. Londinium was no longer just defending trade, it was defending itself. In 367 AD, a massive coordinated assault, known as the Great Conspiracy, saw the likes of Picts and Saxons attack Britain simultaneously, combined with mutinies from Roman troops. The empire responded by sending Count Theodosius, who used Londinium as his base of operations whilst he restored order. And for a moment it worked, but the pressure never really went away. By the early 5th century, the Roman world was collapsing. Troops were withdrawn from Britain to defend the continent. Trade networks broke down, imperial officials vanished, coins stopped arriving, public buildings fell into disrepair. And in 410 AD, the Emperor Honorius told the people of Britain to look to their own defence. Rome was gone. Londinium, once the greatest city in Roman Britain, entered a slow and quiet death. The Great Forum was abandoned, the port fell into disuse, the monumental buildings crumbled. Even the church on Tower Hill seems to have been burned within a few decades. By the end of the 5th century, the city inside the Roman walls was largely deserted. The next phase of London, the Anglo-Saxon Londonwich, would not rise here but to the west, around modern Aldwych. Roman Londinium became a vast, silent ruin. Its walls still stood, its roads still cut through the landscape, but the city itself had gone. 4 centuries of Roman urban life on the Thames had come to an end. And that brings us to the end of Roman London, which also, quite fittingly, brings us to the end of this video, and my first year here on YouTube. When I started this channel a year ago, I was genuinely very nervous. Putting myself out there like this was incredibly daunting. I was very aware that I was laying myself out bare in a way I've never really done before. But over the past year, this channel has grown beyond anything I expected. Not just in numbers, but in confidence, in quality, and in the conversations I get to have with all of you in the comments. I'm so much more comfortable in presenting now than I was back then. I've learnt how to tell these stories better, how to structure them, and how to bring the archaeology and the history together in a way that actually feels meaningful. And that is entirely down to you. So genuinely, thank you for watching, for commenting, for encouraging me when I'm not sure that something's actually working, and for sticking around whilst this channel has slowly found its feet. This project started as a bit of an experiment, but it's become something I care about incredibly deeply. So thank you for being part of that journey. And here is to many more stories about Roman Britain. So until I see you on the next one, ciao for now.